Hey everybody, I get a lot of requests for my around the world updates, and it's been a long time since I've done one, so my apologies for that. I will get back into the habit of doing my around the world updates, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. So we're going to start here with the pond. Not a lot to talk about in terms of doing anything new to it. I'm just doing basic maintenance. We changed out the homemade filter a few days ago. I have been adding some iron supplement, and I've been adding some Flourish trace minerals. I'm hoping my tiger lotus will do better. If you see it down here, you can see how all the new growth is really stocky and stout, and it's down near the bottom, well underwater. None of it's growing up near the surface. A lot of the stuff you see at the surface is water sprite that has sort of gotten caught in a few of the older lily pads that were still on the surface. So I'm hoping the iron will bring the red color back, and I'm hoping that the Flourish trace minerals will help it grow a little better. Other than that, I don't have any issues growing plants in this tank. You can see my peace lily there. That's a bare root plant hanging down into the water. You can just about make out the roots down there. So that's no soil or anything. That's just a bare root plant, and it's doing very well. We've got a new bract on it. I prefer to call them flowers, although technically that's a bract, not a flower. And if we look at my other one down here, we can actually see where this one has a new shoot coming in, and judging by how white that is right there, I'm going to assume that this also is going to be a bract that opens up. So we'll have another flower on this one as well. As far as the pump and the filter and all that stuff, everything is ticking over just fine up here on this end. It is looking a little cyanobacteria-y in a few places, but again, that to me looks much more like a natural outdoor body of water flowing than anything I've ever seen in anybody else's aquarium. That to me looks amazing. I love it. Not unhappy with that at all. I did turn the water flow up just a little, so we got a little more splashing than we used to. And you can see how we've got wetness out here. There's a little bit of dampness on the carpet down there. But that extra splashing is allowing my water sprite to grow. And of course this fern, moss. This is Java moss. It's not connected to anything in here. It's just a bridge of Java moss that grows over this. This whole area is doing really well, so I don't mind that little extra splashing. In fact, that's why that splashing is there, is to keep that moss doing well. You can see all the fish are still doing well in there. I got a lot of goldfish. I've got some guppies in there. I've got some rosy barbs. That's the one I was trying to think of. I was having trouble with. I got some rosy barbs, which actually blend in very well with the goldfish. It's hard to really distinguish the rosy barbs on camera unless I get really close to them and point them out. But otherwise, everybody's doing well. I got some black mollies in there. I got some cherry barbs swimming around in there. And to my knowledge, everybody is still doing fine. I've not found any deceased fish in the pond anytime in the last several months. So the pond is doing well, still ticking along, no issues there. I'm going to go ahead and turn this light out, and that'll give us a little less glare on some of these other tanks as we make our way around the room. So let me get my camera stand out of the way here, and we will have a look at my 29 miscellaneous. Now the 29 is about due for a water change. Nothing in particular is leading me to say that as far as the health of the fish or their behavior or anything, but it's due to be topped off again. I do top this tank off fairly frequently. We've got backflow in the center of the filter, which always happens. This is almost a normal state for this tank, is just to have that water flowing back through the middle there. But I do need to get in there, change that filter. We'll top the water off or do a water change one way or the other. Fish-wise, everybody is doing really well in here. You can see my angelfish right here up front. We have definitely established that that is a female. She has laid eggs on several occasions now. I've gotten video of her doing that. The eggs are never there the next morning, of course. And she has no male in there with her, so the eggs wouldn't be fertilized. But she does lay eggs on a fairly regular basis, so I'm assuming she is happy enough, or at least healthy enough. And that is about it going on with the 29. My gourami tank, this is my problem tank when it comes to cyanobacteria. And in my last couple of live streams, we have gotten in there and used my siphon hose, not the gravel vac, but just the straight siphon, which actually removes a vigorous amount of water and can suck quite large objects right out of the tank. And what I do is I go around and I drag it over the surface and I try to scrape as much of the loose cyanobacteria off as I can. And I meant to come back in and give this tank a treatment with ChemiClean after the last time we did that, and I did not. So the water's nice and clear, the glass is nice and clean because we just got in there and did some maintenance on it, but that cyanobacteria is still growing like crazy in there, and I really want to do something about that. I'll never get on top of it. I realized that long ago. This is always my problem tank when it comes to the cyanobacteria. It's been in there for years and years and years. No matter what I've ever done to try to get on top of it, it never does. It'll slow it down, it'll beat it back, but the cyanobacteria always returns, and it usually returns with a vengeance. And so again, I've stopped worrying about getting it out of the tank, and I just now sort of work on mitigation to keep it from looking too overgrown with the cyanobacteria. So not terrible, but not my best looking tank either. I don't know, we'll have to see whatever happens with this. Something will happen sooner or later. Moving on to my other 55-gallon tank, the one that I actually just call my 55-gallon tank. I did put a cyanobacteria treatment, there we go, in this tank the other night. And you can see it's having some effect. We've got a lot of algae growing on everything, but the dark green cyanobacteria is fading away. So I've got another live stream tonight. It's my Wednesday members live stream, and so maybe tonight while we're doing my members only live stream, we'll get in there and we'll dose it with some more cyanobacteria. Dose it with some more ChemiClean. Don't know why I keep getting the name of the treatment confused with the name of the issue. Anyway, this is my singular discus. This discus was in my other tank with all of the discus until I found that it was being bullied and being treated very, very aggressively, and it looked like it was on death's door. So I moved it over into this tank where it lives by itself now, and it seems to be quite happy. I did have some initial issues. There was an angelfish in this tank. In fact, it was the angelfish that we now have over here. The reason that angelfish is in this tank was because when I put the discus over here into this tank, that angelfish started bullying it immediately. And in fact, if you look at the discus closely enough, if you see the side of it, you can see some marks down the side. It looks like it's got some kind of issues or something going on one side, and those marks have been there ever since that angelfish was beaten on it. And so I think that angelfish actually did some physical damage. It damaged the scales on the side, and now the scales don't grow properly, and you can actually see some markings down along its left side. Can't really see them from here, but if you look on the other side, if it ever turns around and cooperates for us, or if you look earlier in the video, when we first saw this discus, we could see its left side, and you can see those sort of white marks down the side. Anyway, that's all they are. It's not some kind of disease. He's not suffering from ick or white spots or anything like that. That is actually remnants of that angelfish bullying it around. But otherwise, it's doing really well. It seems to be quite happy. I'm down to 2 of my diamond tetras, and if you'll notice, this one diamond has just a little bit of buoyancy problem. It starts to drift down and has to kick its tail a little bit to come back up. And so that's not unusual to see these older tetras start to suffer little issues like that. I have had these diamonds in here for several years now, and for tetras, that's pretty long lived. I started out, I think, with 7 of them. I'm down to 2. So I don't know if I'm going to replace them with more diamond tetras or not. I probably will, just because I think the diamond tetras are so amazing and they just look so incredible in this tank. So one of these days we'll get in there and we'll start rebuilding that school of the diamonds. Everybody else in this tank is doing well enough. I do have a couple of clown plecos that are in quarantine right now, and at least one of them is going to end up in this tank. I do have a clown pleco in this tank already, but they're so small that I think I could get away with having 2 of them in here without them fighting a little too much. And so eventually we're going to have another clown pleco in here. Maybe Friday night on the Friday night live stream we'll get in there and pull that clown pleco out of quarantine and put it over here. So alright, moving along. This is my 40 breeder, and the reason I've got the light turned off in this tank is because I'm using this new LED grow light, and it's a doozy. It puts an awful lot of light on that tank. And so this tank I now have, I think I've got 5 left. I counted 5 the other day. I started out with 7 or 8 Otocinclus in this tank. I also have 1 rubber lip pleco, and I'm trying to get on top of the overwhelming amount of algae that's been growing in here. And so far, between keeping the lights turned off during the day and keeping those Otocinclus in here, they're doing a fine job of removing the algae. If you'd seen this tank a few weeks ago, then you'd know what I'm talking about. If this is your first time seeing it, you don't really have anything to compare it to. But all of this wood that you can see that's cleared off, all these rocks, all these plants, those were just covered in algae. And yet, look how much bare space we can see. All that wood's nice and cleaned off. All of these plants are cleaned off, where you can actually see the nice green foliage again. My little Nubius up front here have been all cleaned off. So, as I said, Otocinclus, if you can keep them alive, they're finicky little fish. They're not easy to keep alive, but if you can keep Otocinclus, they are worth their weight in gold when it comes to algae removal. It's just astonishing how clean they will make a tank in days of being in there. So not really a lot to talk about in this tank. We're just kind of letting it do its thing, and I'm sort of watching and waiting, and we're going to see whatever becomes of this tank. One of these days, the intention is to get in there and do a thorough rescape. But as I've said many times, this is the very first tank I ever sort of deliberately thought about and set up in a specific way that I wanted it to look, etc. And so this tank holds a lot of nostalgia for me, and it's going to be really tough to get in there and tear that apart and do something else with it. So if I can get it cleaned up and looking good again, maybe we won't have to, but we'll see. We'll leave that for down the road. But that so far is all that's really going on in there. And if you're not familiar with what an Otocinclus is, that little bugger right there is an Otocinclus, often referred to simply as Otos. Some people say Otto, but it is an Oto. It's an Otocinclus. And they're tiny. They're about 1 inch long, maybe 1.5 inches tops, including their tail. And yet they get in there and they just devastate that algae. They're really, really amazing little algae-eating fish if you can get them and keep them alive, as I said. So, moving on, we're going to turn this light back off. And we are going to have a look at my other 125 Darryl. So once again, not much to talk about in this tank. I do need to get in there and at the very least do a top off. I'm kind of saving this for Friday night. We'll get in there and do a water change. If you haven't picked up on it already, I do a live stream every Friday night and Sunday night. And we go around the room and we do tank maintenance and we talk fish stuff. And I'm here to answer questions and help people troubleshoot problems. And we usually just kind of hang out in the fish room and have a good time on Friday nights. So if you're interested in that, Friday night and Sunday night, I do make myself available for questions and so on and so forth for a few hours, both Friday night and Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. So maybe we'll get in here and we'll do some water changing, or at the very least get it topped off or something. You can see how low the water is. My spray bar, or the outlet for where the spray bar is, I took the spray bar off, so I've got more of a garden hose type effect. But the water's so low that it's actually above the water at this point. And my power head down here is struggling to move any water because that too is also exposed above the water line. So at the very least, I might just throw a hose in there today and top it off, and then Friday night we can get in there and do some actual maintenance on it. I just turned the lights on a little while ago, and so all the fish are still kind of laying low. You can see some of my silver dollars back there. You can see a little group of those gambusias right there, scattering around as I get closer to them. Got my angelfish hiding back there. big old pleco hanging on the rock right there. And then of course my spotted tilapia Flo hiding back there in her corner. And of course we also need to get in there and get the glass wiped down, as you can see all the scum and stuff growing on that. So again, not a lot to talk about in here, nothing really going on. The summer months are upon us, and during the summer I spend a lot of my time outdoors and hiking and kayaking, and my fish keeping hobby sort of takes a back burner through the nicer seasons and the warmer months. And then as we get into the autumn and the cooler months, I'll tend to be back down here, and I'll spend a lot more time down here in the fish room or whatever. So again, not a lot going on, not really doing anything with any of the tanks at the moment, not in the process of doing any experiments or trying new fish or anything, just kind of going around and catching everybody up to date on what's going on with the tanks and give you a few minutes to look at them. My snail tank is doing okay. I've been keeping the lights in this one turned off just because the water turned green on me, and I've just not been able to get the water to not be green anymore, and so I just keep it turned off. You can see the water still flowing. It doesn't look like it by this side. You can see the water still does flow through that filter, and of course that is a natural filter of Java moss. Let me see if I can get this light turned on. There we go. So that is a natural Java moss filter, and you can see how deep it hangs down into the water, and that's why we're not getting a lot of water flow coming out of there, or any splashing or anything. It's just kind of running through that Java moss and back into the tank. Excuse me. Swallowed the wrong way. But you can also see I've got some snails growing on the side, and if we look around in the back, a lot of times you will see a whole bunch of snails on that back glass. So they're in there and they're still breeding. I'm just trying to get on top of that green water by keeping the light turned out. It's not like the snails need it to live or anything. That is the bucket that I keep my pothos plant in. That pothos plant now grows up and over, comes back down. That's an archway so we can get it back into where my workout equipment is. So it comes all the way across the top of my 125 Darrell, comes down, we run it all the way across the front, and it's all the way down and hanging here. So I need to tie it up one more section. I keep hanging it on these little hooks, so it needs to go one more section, and then we're going to start coming across, and then eventually we're going to have to go up and over the doorway and then back down, and we'll bring it across back this way. And my goal is to see if I can get that pothos to go all the way around the room while it's just growing in a stagnant bucket there. And I do put a little bit of flourish in there in that bucket from time to time too, to keep that pothos nice and healthy. So moving on to my ham tank, my fancy goldfish that all ham it up every time I get near the tank because they think they're going to get some nummies. The glass in this tank gets really covered in algae really quickly. I clean the glass in this tank all the time, but it is because, once again, I have one of these really bright LED grow lights that is not really meant to be hung over a fish tank. That's probably more likely meant to be hung over some marijuana, but I have it hanging over my fish instead. It does a great job of lighting the tank up and making everybody look absolutely beautiful, and my plants are going to grow crazy in the tanks that I have that light over. But unfortunately the cyanobacteria, the algae, that stuff is going to grow like crazy too. So one of these days I will also get around to putting some sort of pleco in this tank to help with the algae. The goldfish, of course, are great algae eaters, and I have several nearite snails in this tank. You can see one right here is in the process of cleaning the glass for me as we speak. Well, unless Blackie comes along and knocks it off the wall. So that is Blackie. That is Wednesday. That is Melissa Fish, who's getting huge. And that is Bruce Brown. So all four of the fish in this tank actually have names, which is unusual for me, but they do. So moving along to my discus tank. I got in there not long ago. We removed a bunch of red tiger lotus. I think I pulled 7 plants out of there. We still have plenty of pads on the surface from the 2 that I left in there. And somehow or another, I don't know when I did it, but I contaminated this tank with duckweed. I've got duckweed in here now. Not happy about that, and I'm going to start working on getting it out of here eventually. But right now, we've got duckweed in the discus tank. Thought about putting a goldfish in here with the discus just to help get rid of the duckweed, which is still not out of the question. I still may put a comet goldfish in here. I don't think that would look out of place. I don't think it would bother the discus. And I'm sure the discus wouldn't bother the goldfish, and I'd be rid of my duckweed. So it looks like after we got rid of the problem discus, the one that was being bullied, I really hate to try to do this without glare. Hang on, let me do this. Turn my goldfish tank light off, and then we'll have a little less glare on the front of the tank. Don't have to look at my sexy legs anymore. So the discus are just chilling at this point. I had that one that is now in the 55. We saw that one earlier, and that was getting bullied and picked on and harassed, and it was almost on death's door when I got it out of there. And that was the second one that happened to. The first one actually did die. I did not realize what I was witnessing was just bullying of the fish. I thought what I was seeing was a sick fish. I thought it had some sort of illness. I was treating it for illnesses, but I left it in the tank, and since the issue was bullying, leaving it in the tank was the worst possible thing I could have done to it, and unfortunately it did not survive. So after that one was gone, a few weeks later, I noticed another one was starting to experience the exact same symptoms. And when I paid a little closer attention, I realized that's when I realized it was the bullying rather than some sort of illness. And so I got the bullied fish out, which we saw earlier in the 55 over there. It's doing great, looks amazing. And then ever since then, I was afraid it was going to be one after another, but it has not been. It seems like we had that little bit of a problem with those 2. Again, the first one died. The second one has been removed, and ever since then, these discus get along great. It doesn't seem like there's any issue whatsoever. Now, again, if you're a regular viewer of my live streams, you'll know I usually wrap my live streams up by sitting here in front of the discus tank, hanging out for a little while, and just shooting a breeze with everybody. And when I do that, I will also throw some algae wafers or some other food in there for the discus, and once they get the food in there, then you'll start seeing them fighting and acting a little more aggressive towards each other. But I assure you, that's only when there's food involved. As you can see, the rest of the time they are really just chilled out and hanging around. They don't seem to fight or bother each other. They don't even really stay in a tight group. We got a couple that are hanging out down here doing their own thing. And then they just sort of spread themselves out around the tank, although with me standing here in front of them, talking so loudly, that might have them somewhat disturbed. But all in all, the discus are doing really well, and everybody's looking good, nice and healthy. You can see my Tenopoma back there, he's thick as a brick. He is a beefy boy. And in this case, I do actually know that this is a boy. If you look at the gill flaps on the Tenopoma, of course he's going to turn and face us right now, but if you look at the gill flaps on the Tenopoma, you can see right there where the tip of my finger was touching, you'll notice he has these little sort of spiky protuberances that stick backwards. You see that little light spot on the end of his gill flap there? That is actually the little spiky protuberances, and if it's male, you will see them. If it's a female, you will not. The females do not have those little spiky bits. There, you get a good look at it now. You see that little white sort of spot on the back of the gill flap? That's a series of little spiky things, I guess. I'm not sure what they're called. Little spiky protuberances. But that indicates that that is indeed a male Tenopoma. one of the few fish I actually do know positively what the sex is. Moving on to my 20. A little bit of bad news in this tank. I had the German blue ram in here, and then I put this angelfish in here. And anybody that's got any experience with angelfish knows that angelfish are just absolute dicks. And this one, as small as it is, has already harassed and bullied my GBR to death. I thought I was going to be able to let this angelfish grow out a little more, and eventually I'd be able to get in there and remove it and put it in a different house. But it is unfortunately too late. My German blue ram was already been bullied to death. So I did get in there and did a lot of work. We cleaned out some of the plants. I have to figure out how to separate this fern. I'm not really sure how its growth habits are or what's going on in there with the way it's attached to the wood. Whether it goes in runners, I'm not exactly sure how that works, but we're going to have to get in there at some point and thin that fern out. In the meantime, I did thin out my Ludwigia, and I thinned out the water sprite, so I do have both Ludwigia and water sprite, as well as Java fern and Java moss available for sale at the moment. So you can check out my email down below if you're interested in that. Contact me, and we can talk about getting you some plants shipped off to you. So not a lot going on in here other than the plant removal and the loss of the fish. Again, not really into, you know, experimenting and doing a lot of tinkering this time of year, but we'll get there. Quarantine tank just has a couple of the rubber lip or clown plecos in it, just waiting for them to find a home. They've been in there for weeks and weeks now, so they're ready to come out. It's just a matter of actually pulling them out and doing something with them. And last but certainly not least is Butterbean's tank. This is my figure 8 puffer Butterbean. And if I get down here and turn this forward light on, we'll actually be able to see him a little better, although that usually freaks him out a little bit when that light comes on. So this tank could always use a little bit of work. Would not be a bad idea probably to do a cyanobacteria treatment in this tank. This is one that's got some marine salts added to it. I don't have so much marine salts in here that we are at brackish levels of salinity, but I do have marine salts in here. I do add some marine salt back to this water to keep the mineralization nice and high, and as a result we struggle with our plants. My Java fern in there looks like bloody hell, and the Anubias I put in there recently is not doing very well either. You can see how faded and yellow a lot of the leaves are. I'm not getting any new foliage coming out off of it, so we might have to start doing a little bit of treatment for this tank too, putting a little bit of Flourish or something in there. I don't know, but my plants have never done well in this tank. I used to have it like way up at the high end brackish level, and obviously the plants didn't do well then, but I've lowered it and lowered it and lowered it for Butterbean's sake. You can see he looks fantastic, and yes, I am saying he arbitrarily. No idea what gender or sex this fish is. And I was asked the other day if there was a way you could just visually identify a puffer's sex, and I do not think there is. I really don't. I think I would have to actually see this fish spawning before I would be able to tell whether it was male or female. So I don't know. I just say he arbitrarily because saying it sounds wrong. And I honestly don't think he's going to care one way or the other. So there you go. But not a lot going on in the tank other than just getting in there and needing to do some maintenance. That's fairly typical. This is one of my more neglected tanks. Not really sure why that is, but it is. There's just some tanks that I just really don't do a lot of work on, and this is one of them. But Butterbean himself is looking great. If you remember a while ago, it's been quite some time now, he used to have those white sort of lesions and whatnot all over him. Looked awful, but I reduced the salinity and I took it from being very, very brackish, and I brought it all the way down to being just below brackish. Again, there is some mineralization in there. I do put some marine salts in there. I just don't put a lot in, and the change in his environment seems to have done wonders for him. He looks so much better and healthier now than he did before. no more lesions, no more spots on his body. And he seems to be doing really, really well. So that's it, everybody. We're all the way back to where we started. And in fact, we're going to come all the way back to the goldfish pond. We're going to get that light turned back on. And I'm going to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, I apologize for the dearth of around the world updates. It's been a while since I've done one, but I promise I will try to get back in the habit of doing them more frequently. And feel free to remind me if you feel like you're ready for one and it's been a while since you've seen me shoot an around the world update and you'd like to, then by all means comment, email me, whatever. Just nudge me and I'll get on it. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you real soon on the next one.